Growth Management Act, although valuable, is probably the greatest illustration of systemic racism I've ever seen.
Welcome to the Voter Interest Project's candidate interviews for 2024. I'm Alan McPheeters, the Executive Director of the Voter Interests Project. In 2024, voters in Island County will elect county commissioners for District 1, Central and South Whitby, and District 2, Oak Harbor. 7 candidates filed to run for these seats during filing week in May. We've invited all of these men and women to make their case in our second annual candidate interview series. We also have extensive coverage of these candidates on our website, voterinterests.com. The following interview is with Jill Johnson, a Republican of Oak Harbor, the incumbent District 2 commissioner who is running for re-election to the seat she has held since 2013. We provided a list of potential questions to Commissioner Johnson in advance of the interview. Okay, well, good afternoon. Today is Friday, June 21st, and we're here with Jill Johnson, who is running for election as the Island County Commissioner in District 2. Commissioner, welcome to the Voter Interest Project.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm excited.
My pleasure. Where are you today? Clearly not in a meadow overlooking the water, but...
So we're doing this from my bedroom, and because I'm 50-50 on the bed making, I thought maybe a backdrop would send a better message.
I know exactly what you mean. If you actually could see the wall behind me, you'd see all the places where there have been holes in it and everything. We've got this nice background. So, okay. Let's set the stage. Now, you've been in office for 3 terms. So theoretically, you're a familiar figure, but there are people who move in and out of the county voting for the first time, whatever. So let's do a little rapid fire kind of stuff. Biographical information about you to sort of set the stage. Great. Are you married or single?
Married to Alex Pfeiffer.
Alex Pfeiffer. Do you have children?
We don't, but we take care of some kids.
Very good. And you were raised around Whitby. You're a graduate of Oak Harbor High School.
Oak Harbor High School, class of 89. I'm so old now, I don't care anymore. I just say it. Yeah, Oak Harbor High School.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, I'm class of 84. So.
Whoa.
Now, after high school and before you got back to here, did you serve in the military?
I did not.
Okay. And I have this question. I mean, this sort of rapid fire section got boilerplated from last year, and I think it's probably more important for a bunch of municipal people who actually are part-time gigs, which you are not. But let's talk about your professional background, what you used to do before you became a county commissioner and how that's prepared you. So what did you do?
So I graduated from Central Washington University with a communications and economics degree, and I wanted to be a business reporter, and I did not find a job in that time period as a reporter, but I learned the who, what, when, where, why, how questions, which kind of prepared me for this job. And then I left Washington State for about 10 to 12 years, and I did fundraising for different organizations, political organizations primarily, well, totally. Around the country. So I moved around a lot. And then I moved back here and I was like in my I don't know, or early 30s maybe, for some family reasons. And because I love it, sense of place. And then I worked at Whidbey Island Bank in marketing, and then the Oak Harbor Chamber of Commerce for 6 years, supporting the business community and learning about community issues and trying to understand how to be the voice of a community and advocate appropriately for them. And that's what I did before I ran for county commissioner.
It used to be when I lived in Linwood that my theory was you wanted to serve on a planning commission before you ran for office. And I still think that's a good place. But more and more, it seems like people who are working at the Chamber of Commerce have a good background in a lot of the issues that they have to face to run for city council or for county commissioner. One of your successors was up for the appointment for state senator when last time that was an option. And then Angie Mosier just took a job with the city of Oak Harbor. So that's an interesting springboard to get into elective office.
I did do the planning commission as well, but I think what prepares you is that you just get the diversity of all the issues, right? So you learn about zoning because your businesses can't locate where they want. You learn about economic challenges. You learn about community. I mean, you're hearing it all the time. And so you just become a natural voice.
Sure, that makes sense. So thus endeth the rapid fire round.
Okay.
Uh, a lot of times with candidates, when we were doing these last year, it's, what are your qualifications for the job? But since you've been in the job for 12 years, maybe it's more interesting to talk about what have you learned about being a county commissioner, especially because we talked 4 years ago. And you'd learned quite a bit by then. What have you learned about being a county commissioner over the last 3.5 years?
So the last 3.5 years are different. One, because the first couple of years of this term were still COVID, right? 2020. So I feel like this term got truncated because we were in this public health crisis for a period of time. But the other thing that's really different is we've hired a county administrator. And so that has changed a lot of my time focus from like administrative operation aspects of the county to a lot more policy work. And that is surprisingly harder, I find, for
Interesting.
me. Yeah. So I've learned a lot about just, how do you balance the tensions of issues, thinking through like what solutions could work for what problems, and then, dealing with the overwhelming reality that that solution creates other downstream problems. And so, if there was a perfect solution, someone would have already implemented that.
Of course.
And so you're kind of left with the unsolvable problems and the imperfect solutions. And so a lot of just balancing those tensions, and then probably personally learning how to just live with that reality that sometimes you're just not going to have the answer. And the other thing that's happened this term is that some of my early decisions that I loved, that I thought were so brilliant, they're coming full circle, right? And so you're like, ooh, didn't see that coming. Or why didn't I think of that? Or why didn't I ask that? And so, you learn as you do the job, more and more questions to ask, more and more things to consider. But like the fairgrounds, for example, because I know you're going to ask, like, give me an example of that. The fairgrounds, I still think was a good idea to sell to the South Whidbey Port District, but nowhere in my worldview was there a scenario where locally elected officials, local as in the fair port district, would go in opposition to their community's wishes. Like I just didn't think that scenario was possible. And of course that's played out a couple times. And so then I kind of go back and forth on, well, was that the right thing to do? For the county, yes. For the fair itself, I'm not sure. And so those are the kind of things where you think you have it all figured out, and then people and life and time changes, and then your decision is not quite what you thought it was going to be.
Sure, sure. I was going to say, is that an issue? When we talked 4 years ago, and full disclosure for people who are watching this, we did this interview 4 years ago when I was the Island County Republican Party chair. So the framing's a little bit different because now I'm part of this nonpartisan organization. But one of the things we talked about 4 years ago was the difficulty or having to be mindful of staying in your lane. That there are things that are the responsibility of the county, and there are things that are not. And it's very easy to get tempted into doing those things. The decision to sell the fairgrounds to the port is clearly in the county's lane, but is it an issue of the port not understanding their lane with respect to the fairgrounds, or what
I
do you
mean,
think has gone awry there?
I think the port is an economic development organization in terms of mission and the mentality of their court commissioners, right? Or
Mhm.
their port commissioners. And it's an aging infrastructure that needs investment. And so they're trying to figure out, how do you sustain that investment? How do you make that investment? And how do you use it as a tool to grow the economy? The Fair Association itself, they're not worried about growing the economy. They like the history of the place, the history of the event. And they're not the owner of the buildings, although emotionally they are, but they're not the owners of the buildings. So the liability of failing buildings, of wiring that maybe used to be done by volunteers, that worked great for, however many years. In today's world, that's not an insurable situation, right? That doesn't work great anymore. So I don't know that it's necessarily bad. It's just that I just didn't anticipate that there would be such an adversarial relationship and not a more collaborative one, because the community voted to tax itself. The Port District raised its taxes for preservation of the fairgrounds, right? So the
Mm,
community has sent this message: we like the history, we like the place, we like the event, we want this protected. We understand that Island County wasn't the right stewards, and we as a local region are going to take this over. I thought that was a very strong message, but the port's having the same problems the county was having, which is, where do you come up with the money to pay for these improvements? How do you modernize things and hold true to that history? The popularity of fairs change over time, their purposes are changing. And so, but again, I thought, well, just make that as local as possible and let that community feel that tension, because in reality, I care about the fair. But as an Island County commissioner, looking at how much money we were putting into it, it's like, North Whidbey's not overly passionate and Camino has no passion. And so
right.
you're looking at that tax base and you're like, this is not really justifiable in terms of the amount of investment it would take to make it viable. But again, the collaborative nature between the Port Commission and the Fair Association, I didn't see that going the way it was going. I thought, well, keep the
Right.
conversation local as possible and it'll work itself out.
Yeah.
You know,
Well,
dare to dream.
I so Kurt Gordon down at the Port of South Whidbey has been really, I think, the prime mover on this notion of building workforce housing down at the fairgrounds. And I thought that's a weird idea, but he's trying something. He
Right.
sees a problem and he's trying to make a solution. And I think in a lot of ways, what the county did with selling the fairgrounds to the port is similar. We have a problem. Here's something we could do, and maybe not expected, that might work out really well. And sometimes those gambles pay off, and sometimes they're a problem. So
And I
I
don't
don't
think
want to
it
make this the fairground
wasn't the
show.
worst decision. It's just, it wasn't quite going as I envisioned it. And now I've been here long enough to where, you're starting to see some cracks in the pavement. And it's like, well,
Right.
shoot, that looked really good when we first paved it, right? And so I think that was just one of the life lessons I've learned, is that you can nail it or think you've nailed the decision at the time. And then as circumstances change, or you think of new questions you should have asked, you may or may not have ended up in a different place. I think for
Sure.
sure I would have still made a move to sell the fairgrounds because we weren't good stewards. But maybe tighten up the contract and how we sold it a little bit, right?
Sure. Let's pivot a little bit.
Yep.
This is not really the Port of South Whidbey show. Uh, so you've been in office for 11 and a half, 12 years. You're trying to get through four, or trying to get another term for four more. What what are the biggest problems that Island County faces that you want to solve in a fourth term?
Yeah. So I want to be clear on this question. I don't automatically just say I'm doing another 4 years. Before I decide to run, every time I do go through some self-reflection of, one, are you effective? Have you been effective? Two, is there anything you think you can accomplish or that you offer that somebody else couldn't offer? Because I also think you shouldn't hoard leadership jobs or be the voice of an area for too long, right? That there needs to be some transition. So I reflect on this. This time, really, I was thinking the last term would probably be it. This time, when we started really going through the issues, I was like, no, no, no. There are very specific things that I feel like I need to work on, based on the experience. So one, we're
Sure.
in the middle of our comprehensive plan. I mean, we are in the middle of it. So it's not the time for like a policy shift per se, right? Also, I had years on the Oak Harbor Planning Commission. There's a lot of nuanced conversations with the city of Oak Harbor about how you grow and the ways to grow that I am well prepared for, because I hold a lot of history in that conversation. I was there when the city and the county sued each other over growth and expansion, and I have knowledge about that because I lived through it. So I think that's valuable. Then there's this: we need a new jail. And it's one of those conversations that I resisted for a long time because it's going to be expensive. It's a lot of money to put towards a population of people that we're all frustrated with on some level a little bit. And yet at the same time, um, the way we're going about the jail, one, it's old. The style of managing the people and keeping them safe in there creates a little risk for us. It's not meeting our rehabilitation needs, which is really important because we're just spending a lot of money recycling people. We need more space designed for programs and services, family reunification. But it took me a long time to understand that. It also takes a while to learn the budget well enough to know what you can leverage. So that conversation is extremely important and something that really the next 4 years is about. Like that jail is a significant investment in conversation. Then we've got our planning and permitting problems, and they're ongoing, right? And by the way, every county commissioner I talk to in the state apparently has the slowest planning department and the highest turnover. I have yet to meet a county that doesn't have the slowest, and so these problems aren't unique to us. It's the perception of every community about their community planning department. But there are inefficiencies. There are things where we need to invest more in structural leadership to ensure consistent training and interpretation of our staff. There really are software investments that we need to follow through on. We've purchased, but we haven't followed through and implemented. And again, when you're newer, you can get the runaround, right? People will tell you, well, that's not a problem. Well, that's not, you don't understand it. Well, now I've been here long enough to know, no, I actually understand it. And this actually is the problem. And you will be working on a solution that looks like this, right? So it's a lot harder to give me the runaround. I don't get gaslit quite as much as I used to when I was brand new. And some of it takes that experience to kind of bird dog thing to the finish line. And so those are some of the bigger conversations that are going on. I have like my own little, I call them specialty projects, but areas where I see need that are kind of more unique to my county experiences, how we communicate within the court system to families, I think could use a little investment. There are some places where I think we need some sidewalks. There are some trails that I think need to be more ADA accessible, right? Smaller things, but the big thematic things are really that permitting culture that we have in all departments, public worth, public health, and planning, because our people are smart. It's our process that's off. And then comp plan and the jail. And those are really my focus areas for the next 4 years. And it will take that long to pull those things across the finish line. Hopefully not 4, I think maybe 3.
Well, you've got
to be done.
about a year and a half to finish off the comp plan, but
right.
But that kind of leads to this question, because the comp plan and permitting are tied in that we have a problem. We don't have enough housing. And not a unique problem to Island County. Is this widespread perception that permitting doesn't work fast enough part of the problem of why we don't have enough housing, or is it a bigger state level problem?
It's a bigger state level problem. I mean, it all plays together, right? Overregulation drives up the cost of affordable housing, delays the timelines, keeps the building industry from being able to build houses faster because each home takes longer than the last home, so that's part of it. But really the housing shortage that we're experiencing is, one, land's finite, right? And so you just can't make more of it because there's more demand. You can make it denser. And then the state says only certain places can carry density. So by regulation, you create scarcity. Scarcity drives prices up, right? And so if you're not willing to allow a piece of land to develop at maximum density because it could sustain that, because it's not in the right jurisdiction or it doesn't have access to water and water and sewer, well, you're limiting then the growth potential of an area, and it makes it harder for developers to develop. It makes it harder for people to utilize their property to its fullest potential. There are environmental values to that, but the downside of some of these real regulations is that, again, that scarcity kind of what we're creating in scarcity and the economic impact of that. And that also, I have an equity concern about that as well, that, as we talk about diversity and equity and inclusion and how different incomes are affected by government choices, I'm on the record as saying that the Growth Management Act, although valuable, is probably the greatest illustration of systemic racism I've ever seen. Those people of that income will live in this area. You will live in pavement and in high-rise apartments. And those who can afford 5 acres and a big home, they can live this way with clean air and more trees. And you start really thinking about what that says in terms of economics and the parallels to certain populations. And you watch over and over policymakers who are primarily homeowners. Scarcity makes me wealthier. It doesn't make me poorer. You
Right.
watch them put those kind of programs in place and see who it benefits and who it leaves behind. And then you think about the fact that in our history, we didn't allow certain populations of people to even access financing or buy homes, right? So they were left out of that land ownership wealth cycle. And now we're coming in with these environmental policies, creating more scarcity and basically saying you will live this way and you will live this way in this location. It for me, it's a pretty impactful message, and a little incongruent to how the state talks about you need to accommodate different populations of people and serve people equitably, and yet you design a program that does the exact opposite of that.
I noticed that in watching, say, CACMAC's presentations on the countywide planning process for the city of Oak Harbor, he's outlined how, for the first time, I think, you're being directed not only to say we're going to have this much more housing, but we're going to have this much housing at these different income blocks.
Right.
Which seems like the legislatures keep thinking about this. Princess Leia in the first Star Wars movie, meeting Grand Moff Tarkin, she says, the more you tighten your grip, the more systems will slip through your fingers.
Right.
And there's an analogy here. So I don't understand that process very much at all. I've noticed in looking over the public statements and the websites of candidates, other candidates in both your race and the District 1 race, a lot of candidates want to say we need to commit to the rural character of Island County. But that implies all of the growth will take place within the 3 metropolitan or 3 urban incorporated areas at Coopville, Langley, and Oak Harbor. And the argument for the rural, keeping the rural, is that people moved here, they expect it to be this way. Well, people moved to Oak Harbor expecting it to be a small town, and when 12,000 more people, or whatever the number ends up being, are forced into the city limits of Oak Harbor, it's less small town. I know you're sort of the top level official dealing with this in Island County, but a lot of this seems to be just the state mandating what you're going to do. How much freedom of action do you feel like the county commissioners have with respect to the comp plan, and how much is it really just being dictated by the state?
The growth requirements are pretty much dictated by the state. We could have chosen a lower population growth number and planned for fewer people, but that's a little irresponsible because our growth was trending higher than that number. And so they give you some options, but you have to choose one of the options, the high, the mid, or the low. So the state controls the framework. Sorry, it controls the elements of the comprehensive plan. Like we have to have a climate element. You have to have utilities, transportation, natural resources. I think economics is optional. I don't know if it's a required element, but we do it. So they give you a framework that you have to do, and then they allow for local decision making within that framework. But in reality, to accomplish the mandates that are set out, even your local flexibility is constrained because,
Right.
Again, Island County takes a certain share of the growth, which we take a larger share because we have an entire island that is only county. There's no jurisdiction to put people in. So, but yet we have a density limitation that then says, well, how are we going to accomplish providing X amount of housing for this population of people when we can't get the density that would make their housing affordable, right? We can't, building apartments is nearly impossible in the rural area unless you're in a Freeland, non-municipal urban growth area. Clinton, potentially you could do it, But now we're really stuck because you can't get that density on the septic systems and it's not allowed under our regulatory framework. That's the part where there's local control conceptually, but that framework really is the constrictor.
Yeah. Well, my understanding is, you can confirm this or tell me I'm wrong, but from throughout the history of the Growth Management Act, Island County, the Growth Management Act has always wanted to put people into the urban growth areas. But Island County has been an outlier, and that most of the growth, the overwhelming amount of the growth, has happened in the rural areas. And this really feels like the state saying, no, we're not going to put up with that anymore. Is that fair?
I mean, what the state's trying to do is get affordable housing built and avoid sprawl, right? I think it's true in Island County, we have a very unique problem. San Juan County has a similar type of problems. They have entire islands without urban growth areas on them, right? So how do you meet this density requirement that the state's basically saying you have to have? I think though that I lost my train of thought. It was a brilliant response, so I'm sorry. The other thing about 12 years in office is you're 12 years older, and you just watch that happen right there.
Well, you're not 81, so
fair.
There is that. But that ties into something else that I've been wondering about for a while, and now that I have you here, I can ask. So, the Conservation Futures Funding Program, and a lot of that money goes to the Whidbey Camino Land Trust. And I did a little back of the envelope calculating maybe a year or so ago, and given the amount of properties that they're already protecting, they have something like 5% of the land area of Island County that's protected. And by protected, I assume you couldn't build apartments, maybe even houses in those places. So where does that end? How much land needs to be protected by these programs?
I do not know. I mean, honestly, I don't know. And it is one of those questions that I've watched boards of commissioners continue to ask, and I've really watched staff not provide a clear answer. Some of what we're asking right now is, what types do we have? Like, our comp plan speaks a lot to preservation of agriculture. I don't disagree that preservation of agriculture is a goal. I'm not sure if it's an aspirational goal or an accomplished goal, right? Could we make a statement that says Island County has successfully preserved agriculture using conservation futures programs where we've purchased development rights off ag land? We may or may not be aspiring to do that anymore. How much open space is really necessary? How much forestry have we protected? How many passive parks have we protected? Is there a specific area that we should be leaning into and targeting and saying Island County doesn't have enough of this? Have we protected critical aquifer recharge areas? I mean, arguably that's lots of places, but is there, should we target more on certain types of land? I would say that is a responsible use of that program. But what you need to do to target is to know what you have and what you need. And I think right now we're still kind of in that mentality of, well, it's undeveloped, so it's worth purchasing. And I don't think that's a high enough value or a high enough standard. I think that we are at a point now where we've had this program for a while. We've purchased significant properties. Fakima Farm on the north end of the island. I mean, probably one of the highlights of my county commissioner career was to watch that be preserved, right? Barnum Point on Camino Island, significant park purchase over there that opened that beautiful vista up for the community trails. But how many of those special places still remain? And when does purchasing just become purchasing? And I think that's where we are in these conversations and what we have to guard against, right? I'm for conservation of things we need to preserve but I'm not for just buying something because it may get developed. Development may be the best and highest use. Development could occur safely if done appropriately, right? So development in and of itself, I don't believe is bad, nor do I believe conservation is bad. I just think that both things done like blindly and single agenda get you to a place where you don't want to be.
But as an outsider, it feels like the Whidbey Camino Land Trust is playing Pokemon. They got to get it all. And I don't know that that's true. I've never talked to anybody from there. I could be misreading the situation. I don't know. but that's just the sense I have is we will preserve everything till there isn't anything left to preserve.
I think they're working on a strategic plan. And one thing I've talked with them about, look, we're preserving a lot of open space in South Whidbey, for example. Well, South Whidbey is primarily one house per 5 acres, right? It's not overly developed. You look
Right.
at the Oak Harbor area, it is very, very dense. Why are we not looking for more opportunities to preserve larger chunks of land up here where maybe, a trail system, an open space system, a larger park system, more trees that clean up the air that comes from the impact of a more urban area, right? If we're really talking about the environmental value of preservation, why are you preserving in areas that are already relatively preserved by zoning? Why are you not looking closer to areas that really need dollars to economically support the maybe right environmental choice for a specific piece of property? I think we
Which
need to
takes
start
us to Fun
shifting our
Marsh.
mentality a little bit on how we use the program.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, Jill, we had this problem 4 years ago. We'll probably have it every other time we ever talk.
What are you
I'm
doing
looking
about
at the
it?
clock and I'm down to past the point where I wanted to say, oh, I need to rein this in. So we should probably just wrap it up here. We could talk for hours about this stuff, I'm sure. But
I would, but I don't get invited to a lot of dinner parties for a reason. So
well, we'll have to see if we can correct that. But for now, if people want to get involved in your campaign, what's the best way for people to get hold of you? Is it Facebook or the website or Twitter?
I'm a Facebook user. There's a Commissioner Jill Johnson page, and then I have a Vote for Jill. It's all spelled out at gmail.com.
Okay.
Don't .org it. That goes into the abyss of we are not sure where. So vote for Jill at gmail.com. And those two ways are probably the best. The website, look, I can't get into the technology of that thing, but every 4 years you do this. So it's hard for me to like break into my stuff again. People have different strengths.
Yes, that's
Facebook, I'm on Facebook.
Facebook is a good place. Well, we will put all of these links in on the website when we put this up so that people will be able to find you. So
Great, thank you.
Thank you so much for taking the time to do this interview. I think it's really valuable for people to get to hear from the candidates in a longer format than, the aggregate of 6 minutes you'll get to talk at a candidate forum or something like that. So thank you so much.
I appreciate the opportunity. These are really complex jobs and complex issues, and they take a little longer than sound bites to talk about. So I'm grateful that I had a chance to talk and dig myself into a hole, maybe, or who knows. But you want voters to know who they're getting, and I think transparency is important. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll talk soon.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for watching our interview with Jill Johnson, who's running for re-election as the Island County Commissioner in District 2. We invite you to subscribe to our newsletter, available in 4 local editions: Camino Island, North Whidbey, Central Whidbey, and South Whidbey. The newsletter arrives in your mailbox every Monday morning with news and events from your part of Island County. Subscribe to our newsletter at voterinterests.com/subscribe. And look for more of these candidate interviews as the election season continues. Thank you.